Clare Norman, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Thank you. It is lovely to be here. I never quite know what to say to those welcomes. How do you make it a bit different to what the last person said? Oh, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. And I genuinely mean all of that. But one of these days I'll come up with something fabulous to say at that point.
Yeah. And it's a balance, isn't it? There's the intention I hear to go with what feels authentic and emergent in the moment. And then I often fall to one of two different thank you very much or yeah, absolutely. And to that point, I am conscious that you are not a stranger to having your thoughts on coaching and the practice of coaching and the business of coaching out in the wider world. So a sincere thank you for coming on the Coach's Journey and giving of your thoughts, experience, and wisdom.
I'm really happy to do that. It's a totally emergent process in that I'm always learning something new that I find useful to myself, and I think, well, why not share that with other people as well in case they find that useful. It may be if I can help people to take some shortcuts to something useful. Even though, of course, as coaches, we know that those shortcuts often don't land, or that it's not the right time, or we wouldn't be giving advice in coaching. But there's just something about sharing what I am learning, not just what I have learned to date, but what I'm learning as I go along. So.
Fantastic. Well, I have every faith that we'll get into lots of that. And also, crucially, for this podcast, learn more about your journey and what the route to here has been. I've done a fair bit of research on the lead up to this podcast, a lot of reading, a lot of listening. And I was looking at my notes last night, just thinking a bit about our conversation this morning, and all of it made sense bar one line. So I thought I'd start with that one line. And I'd written down sunburst yellow El Camino. And I wonder, what does that mean to you? Because I searched your blog posts this morning and I can't find where I got that from. What does that mean to you?
Well, the story is, my husband was bored during the second lockdown in 2020, and he was researching American cars. He loves American cars, and long story short, he purchased a buttercup yellow El Camino from California and had it shipped over. The whole shipping saga was rather a palaver in lockdown. It took a long time to arrive, but yes, so it has nothing to do with coaching, but it is something that my husband loves, and so we have buttercup yellow El Camino in our garage, which every now and again gets a little outing.
Wow. Yeah. And it speaks to, I guess, your willingness to share of all the parts of yourselves, because I must have read about it somewhere in something that you've written. Yeah, a buttercup yellow El Camino.
I have no idea where I shared it. I think I would have shared it on Facebook on my personal page, but yeah, I must have shared it more publicly as well on LinkedIn, maybe, or in a blog post or something. There must have been some metaphor behind it. I don't know what it was, but yes, I do try to draw on some of life's stuff, not not just coaching stuff, but I am a whole person after all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
So where did you first discover this thing that we call coaching?
Well, it was back in the year 2000. I was heading up our Leaders of All Levels strategy at the company that I worked for. And I was noticing that the courses that we ran were creating epiphanies for people, for want of a better word, a commitment to do something differently when they got back to work. And yet it seemed that when they got back to work, they were sucked back into this culture that seemingly didn't allow for them to put these things into practice. Now, whether it was the individual or the culture, we could have that discussion about, the systemic stuff that's going on that means it makes it very difficult for some individuals to make some changes. But going back to my story, I was looking for ways to transfer the learning out of the classroom and into the real world, how to make it stick, how to make these commitments stick. And coaching was one of the many interventions that I stumbled across. And so I got myself trained, first of all on a short introductory weekend, and then went further than that and invested more. So January 2001 is the first date on my coaching log when I officially started coaching. And that was as a result of that training and as a result of that search for transfer of learning into the workplace.
Okay. And so the culture that you're talking of, as I understand it, was corporate and a large professional services firm.
Yes.
Do you remember where you trained?
I do. I originally trained with the Coaching Academy. They were called something else at the time, the Life Coaching Academy, I think they were called back then. It was in a massive conference room. There were a lot of people there.
In London?
It was not in London. I think it was Bristol or somewhere southwest. And so I got my first taste of it there, and I got hooked, and continued on that path of experimenting with coaching, experimenting inside the organization. So I don't think I had any external thinkers, as I call them, until probably about 10 years later. So most of my grounding in coaching was internal, and most of it was global. So it was on the phone way back then, before we had video cameras. It was all on conference call technology. So I cut my teeth with virtual coaching, which stood me in very good stead when the pandemic hit, because I'd been doing this thing for years.
Well, for decades by
for
that point.
Decades. It was completely ingrained in me. And actually, I still feel today that audio only was really rich. And but when I say rich, what do I mean by that? There has been some research that shows that thinkers can be more authentic and more vulnerable if they don't feel they are being observed. So I do believe that that's absolutely true. From all of that experience that I had, I felt that people could say more about what they were thinking and feeling and sensing. So yeah, I hold a what's the word? A real liking for doing audio only. It's actually my preferred method of coaching.
Right. And I notice you used the word hooked when you talked about your initial training. And I wonder what specifically hooked you? What was it that drew you into this practice?
So it wasn't the training itself. It was it was experiencing the new knowing that was coming for people, the new wisdom that they were getting. Now, I'm not saying I was a brilliant coach back then. I'm a very different coach today compared to what I was back then. And I would describe myself back then as a performance coach. So I was driving to solutions, which didn't necessarily tap into the depth of who that person was and wanted to be. However, I was hooked on, I guess it was a bit like a drug, if you like, the being able to support people, be useful to them, help them to shift, help them to get unstuck when they felt stuck. I liked the thank yous for helping them in that way, when they might have been stuck for a little while, or they had found themselves not giving themselves enough time to really think about what they wanted and how they were going to get that and what changes they could make. So there was also something in there about this, just giving people time and space, that I got hooked into, because it just felt so vital. It felt vital to them as an individual, and it felt vital to the organization from my perspective. That if people are unhappy but they can't name why, if they can't articulate what's not working and what they would like to be different, because they don't give themselves the time to do that, then that's not good for an organization, because you end up with a lot of unhappy people. So I'm generalizing there, but there was something about helping each individual to move that dial that hooked me in.
And so over the years working internally, what was that journey for you as a coach?
So I applied for my ACC maybe about, I've kind of lost track of what the date was, but it was probably about 3 years in, that I applied for my ACC, and then my PCC another 3 years later.
Okay. And just slowing down on that, the likelihood is that the listenership of this podcast will know what those acronyms mean.
Yeah,
but if
sorry.
you don't, no, not at all. Always a danger when a coach is speaking to a coach that we move into alphabet world. Unpack those two terms for us a little.
Yes. So associate certified coach and professional certified coach. And with the International Coaching Federation. So I had met at some point in that journey, I had signed up to an action learning set facilitator training, and I had met some other external coaches on that course, and it was a couple of those external coaches who guided me towards the International Coaching Federation. I had not heard of them. I hadn't heard of any of the other coaching bodies either. I didn't do any desk research, honestly. I trusted what these external coaches were saying to me about the ICF being the way to go. I'm not sure whether the EMCC and the AC and any of the other coaching bodies existed back then. They perhaps were in their infancy, but these other external coaches didn't know about them either. So looking back, I'm like, why did I choose the ICF compared to all the others? People ask me that, and honestly, it's because that's the only body that I had heard of. And my answer now for sticking with them is twofold. One is that because I was part of a global organization, it felt right to be aligned with a very global coaching body that's recognized globally. And I know more and more that the EMCC and the AC are becoming more globally recognized too, but that's why I've stuck with the ICF. And also I really think that the mentor coaching process, where coaches are observed and given feedback on their coaching, is the best way for a coach to sharpen their edge and to know that they are showing up well in coaching. So rather than writing about your coaching, I think it's really important for people to be assessed on how they actually coach. And I'm sure we'll come back to that in a bit. I'm kind of jumping forward in story a bit, and I will come back to the point of the journey. But there's that's my rationale for choosing the ICF back then, and then my rationale for staying with the ICF.
And just a point on the training. I'm interested on the training that you went through. That it sounds like the potential for future accreditation wasn't something central to that initial training, which from my perspective as a faculty member at the AOEC and being abundantly aware of the plethora of training offers out there now, it's such an integral part that the training, lots of training providers working towards having their courses accredited by the ICF in order that they count towards ICF hours for this ongoing accreditation body. So I guess part of me has an interest in the way in which the coach training landscape was different in the early noughties, and also part of me has an interest in what the overall landscape was in terms of points of difference 20 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, now you're testing my memory. But I can say that the training I went on was not ICF accredited at the time. It has subsequently become accredited. And there was no, as far as I remember, there was no mention of any coaching bodies and aligning ourselves with a code of ethics. I mean, maybe there was, but I don't really remember it. So yes, I think slowly, and then perhaps all of a sudden, coach training organizations have come to that realization that if they want to attract people to their training courses, then all of the competition is getting accredited with, not necessarily just with the ICF, but they may choose to go EMCC or AC or another for some specific, because they are slightly different in what they're offering. So I think coach training organizations are getting wise to the fact that aspiring potential trainees are also starting to get a bit wiser about who they choose for their training. Having said that, they don't know what they don't know at that stage, and they don't know what to ask. And I think that's how I felt at that early stage. I didn't know what to ask to make sure that a training program was the best it could be, or would fit my needs, or any of those things. I just got very excited about, I'm going on this coaching journey. So I suppose I would say to people who haven't yet chosen their coach training, to talk to other people about, to help them, the individual, to figure out what are your criteria for choosing a good training company or an experience, because they are not all created equal, and they don't, although even if they're aligned with a coaching body, they don't all cover everything. So for example, they don't all cover, or haven't historically, but I think the ICF, for example, is now requiring coach training to cover business building, where it, until probably 2 years ago, that was never a requirement of ICF accreditation of coach training. But now it has to be inbuilt, and I think that's absolutely the right thing. It should be part and parcel of coach training, as I think should how to operate in a corporate environment for those who want to coach in a corporate environment. Because if, for example, tripartite conversations, it's not something that somebody new to coaching would know anything about, or even think about, or even ask the questions about, because they don't know what they don't know. So it seems to me that those kinds of things should also be built into coach training. And particularly if an individual is in that environment of working in the corporate world, they need to figure out, how is that different from working with individuals? One of the things I think I'm noticing at the moment, and I may be wrong on this, but I suspect that coach training organizations are focused very much on teaching people how to run a session, how to run a coaching session. And that's brilliant. That's really good. That's what we need to know. And not just know it, but we need to, embody it, really feel it and be present to it. But there's so much more than just what happens in a session. What about a program? How do we think about a program of coaching? And what's different about a one-off session versus a program? And what about the depth of learning that we need about contracting with stakeholders? What about the depth of learning that we need around, well, some people call them chemistry sessions. I'm starting to call them compatibility sessions, because I feel like chemistry has sexual connotations to it. So I'm moving into compatibility sessions. But also what needs to happen before the compatibility session to make sure that that session really is about compatibility and not all the other stuff that might get inserted in there. So I'm realizing I'm going off on one again.
Yeah. And it's like you've pointed towards, at least for me, you've pointed towards like 4 or 5 different trailheads of fascinating investigation. So I want to slow us down and so in the interest of full disclosure, as a faculty member at the Academy of Executive Coaching, like I am a proud position holder for that organization and have a positionality into my view about what coach training offers. And I hear the piece around the importance of presenting all the many considerations in a tripartite conversation, and to those that sounds like an undefined term. Where we work in corporate land, very frequently there is another stakeholder in the relationship beyond, as Claire would call it, the thinker or the coachee, who is potentially sponsoring the coaching within the organization. It may be a line manager, a director, indeed a CEO, an HR director is a good example. So there's sort of one area of investigation there. The one I'd like to come back to before we then jump back to your ACC, PCC and beyond is, I'd be fascinated to learn your headline definition of what these coaching bodies are broadly and why they matter. I judge we will hopefully come to your significant journey through all sorts of different aspects of what they stand for as relates to, for example, the ICF and mentor coaching, and your now not so new master certified coach status again, for which congratulations. A not insignificant achievement.
No.
And indeed one that I know has been a gigantic body of work. So to re-ask my question, what's your headline definition of the coaching bodies, not necessarily detail on each one, and why they matter?
Yes, so they matter to keep us at our edge, at our sharpest edge, is what I would say. So they're holding us to a set of standards, whichever body we align with. I mean, I'd say their competency models are fairly similar. Their code of ethics are similar. Indeed, there is a global code of ethics signed up to by multiple coaching bodies. And just to make sure that our listeners know, I'm differentiating here between the coaching bodies and coach training organizations. There is a really big difference.
Yes.
So coach training organizations, as the name suggests, they offer training. It might be accredited by one of the bodies. And so the bodies are keeping these training organizations honest as well and accountable for providing top-notch training. So the coach training organizations need to prove that they are aligning with the competencies, the code of ethics, etc., and that they are teaching according to those and according to, I suppose, the definition of that coaching body has of coaching. And there are slight distinctions, I would say, between those definitions. The ICF is the most non-directive of all of them. So the coaching bodies are keeping the training organizations to holding them to account for providing great training. They're also then, after an individual has finished their training, the coaching bodies are enabling the individual to get a credential So the ICF would call it a credential. The other bodies, I think, call it accreditation for individuals. But in the ICF, we differentiate between the accreditation that a coach training company gets and the credential that an individual gets. So that credential from from the ICF or an accreditation from the other coaching bodies tells us as an individual that we are adhering to a set of standards. Now, what I do want to say about that is some coaches get a little bit anxious about, oh, does that mean that I have to do things exactly the same way as the next coach and the next coach and the next coach, because I have my own way of doing it? And of course you do, because who you are is how you coach. You bring everything of who you are and your history and your background and your personality into the coaching room. So the bodies are not trying to make you a cookie cutter coach. They are trying to help buyers of coaching know that they are buying somebody of quality as a coach. That this body has kind of given the rubber stamp to say, yes, this coach upholds a certain set of standards, albeit they do it in their own sweet way. So it is the both and, that we can bring our whole self at the same time as adhering to a set of standards. Doesn't have to be either or. So yeah, does that
It does, and I think it also speaks to what I know from previous conversations with you, from much of your writing and speaking. It wholly aligns with a significant part of what drives you as regards professionalizing the industry and having structures in place that we can be held to account against and hold ourselves to account against. Indeed, for example, taking the ICF, the way in which they support a version of understanding what good coaching looks like is, as is current, 8 competencies that have subsets beneath them that help, for example, assessors on coach training programs be able to, with some level of objectivity, although of course I wholly concur that who you are is how you coach, have a framework that allows some level of objectivity of saying this coaching session can justifiably be said to display competency-rich coaching as opposed to this coaching session. And here's why. Here's the observable behaviors that differentiate competency-rich and non-competency-rich coaching.
I like that expression, competency-rich.
I may have stolen it from you.
No, I don't think you did. I don't think I've ever used that, so I'm going to steal it back from you.
I got so excited by having a good expression that I pulled my microphone over, so we'll have a lovely big sort of audio explosion for everyone to enjoy.
Yeah.
So let me take that as an opportunity to come back to your journey and the ACC PCC. I heard approximately 3 years between each. And I've also heard you refer to how you're a very different coach now to when you first recorded in January 2001 on your ICF log, your first coaching session. So casting your mind back to immediately post PCC, what had changed between your training and that 6-year point?
Well, there was a certain level of confidence for sure, because at that point PCC required you to have 750 hours under your belt, not the 500 that it requires today. So I had 750 hours under my belt. Now, I'm not saying that hours a great coach necessarily maketh. That is not true, because if your 750th hour of coaching is the same as your first hour of coaching, then you haven't developed any over that time. So coming back to your question about what was different, here's what it was. So the coach training that I subsequently did was really hot on coaching contracting in a session. And so that was the thing that I had learnt or really embedded into my coaching by that point. That made a massive difference to my coaching, to be getting really crystal clear at the beginning of a session what the thinker wanted out of this session, so that we were no longer having a meandering conversation, but we were getting straight to what mattered most, or as straight as we could get. It doesn't always happen in a straight line, because it can still be emergent, but we need to be asking those questions about what is it that you want to work on today? How will you know you've got what you need? How shall we do this work together today? And subsequently I've added even more into that contracting process around, so what do we need to cover in order to get you from where you are now to where you want to be? What's important about that? And that also reflects the updates to the ICF competency model as well. But certainly I had got much better at the coaching contract, so that we knew by the end of a coaching session how far they had come in relation to what they set out for in the session, and what work still remained for them to do outside of the session. So I think that's what differentiated from the ACC to the PCC for me.
Lovely. And who was your second set of training with?
Coaching development, who I highly rate and recommend. Really experiential. So yeah, whenever people ask me, who would you recommend? That would be one of my recommendations, is coaching development.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Cool. Yeah. And then keeping moving forward on this journey, because I'm conscious we're not even yet at when you set up your company, and there's so much rich stuff to explore before we get there. And then we step through the wardrobe door into Narnia, and it's a whole other set of things. So what's important about PCC to your departure from corporate world, or indeed your departure as an employee from corporate world, as regards coaching and coaching development and like the juicy stuff about being an internal coach and having this glorious steady stream of clients?
Yeah, I mean, do you know what, if people are on their coach training and they're, on the one hand, they're thinking of leaving their corporate role to set up on their own, but on the other hand, they want to get their credential, I say, do you know what, it's easier to get your hours if you're internal, because those people are not paying for their coaching. The organization is paying for your time and paying for the individual's time, and there's no exchange of funds. It's much harder to get an exchange of funds when you're external than it is doing internal coaching. So I feel really, I was going to say I feel lucky, but I made that luck because I put myself out there in that internal world. I offered those that coaching skill to as many people as I could. It wasn't part of my day job. It wasn't part of my job description, even though I headed up leadership development. You know, it was very clear, the contract I had with my part of the organization, that this was something I did for the love of it, not for the rewards from the organization. I was getting rewards anyway from these, you know, from the forward motion of the people who I was working with.
And let me, because it's come up again when you said that, the forward motion of the people, I had a wondering, as for you as a coach that has significant experience as an internal coach and as an external coach, did you have the opportunity to more fully observe the forward progress of clients when you were an internal coach and connected to them through the organization than you do as an external coach nowadays?
Probably not, but purely because most of the people I coached were in other countries. So I never met them, most of them. Having said that, one of the things that I realize now in retrospect is that I probably coached them for too long. So I mean, that was something else that I have subsequently learned was, you know, we didn't really contract for a set amount of time. We just kept going and going and going.
And again, that speaks to this internal piece around, you're not discussing a fee for a program of work.
Yes, and not discussing the shape of the program, and yeah, not discussing what were the boundaries. So in retrospect, I recognize that you know, there weren't really psychological, there wasn't as much psychological safety around that, because neither of us knew how long we were going to be in relationship for. At least that was at the beginning of my coaching journey, perhaps in those first 3 or 4 years. And then I started to recognize, oh, there's something here that I need to do something about. And what I recognize is that I didn't have supervision back then, because I was doing this off to the side of my desk and I didn't want to have to pay for it myself, frankly. You know, again, as I look back, I'm like, oh my goodness, all those things that I was doing back then were that I would say to my former self, really? Really? You did that? That's not right. So yeah, ethically, there were some things that weren't right back then about the way we contracted and the shape of the programs and that kind of thing. I mean, I'm not saying I did anything outrageous, but you know, some of those things about the big C contract, and not getting supervision. I mean, really, God, I kick my former self for that mistake.
Yeah, and I notice it's again in contrast to your like, I've heard you talk a lot about supervision and mentor coaching, and that it's not either or, it's both and, as regards leading an ethically sound, mentally healthy coach practice. That both are powerful places for us to spend time as coaches, to stay as capable as we can be, as sharp as we can be at our edge.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we kind of have to go through that journey of discovery and realize, and I've definitely realized for myself how important both of those are, mental coaching and supervision, but not only for myself, but for the people that I work with and also for their systems. yeah, I'd say I'm much more ethically aware now. And you talked about having a mentally healthy practice. So I would say I'm, I haven't always got that right, but I'm closer to that today than I perhaps was way back then, especially given I was trying to do it off the side of my desk. It wasn't my day job. So I was doing it on top of my day job. So chances are I wasn't at my freshest when I was coaching. And also, I do remember dashing from one meeting, task focused meeting, into coaching. We, in that corporate world, we had the back-to-back meetings without any rest and recuperation or chance to reflect on what had just happened or to get ready for the next. So, all of that, I look back on that and think, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? How on earth could I operate as the best coach I could possibly be by going from one deeply intensive work meeting into a differently intensive coaching session? I've learned a lot along the way about that.
And you have the richness of the embodied experience of that, and the contrast to how you now practice.
Yeah.
And I wonder, in terms of us extracting from your internal coach corporate experience, what else is there that's useful? It really resonates for me, that piece around, for coaches that are internal, perhaps earlier in their journey, the opportunity to have a significant body of people that might well benefit from their coaching, and that it can form a part of their role, or align to their role, and a value add of them being part of a company, even if they're eager to start their own business as a way of getting things up. And I really want to catch that when we come to the end of your time as an employee, how far down the journey of being a coach you already were before you set out your stall externally. What else is there for you to share before we get to you setting out your stall externally?
So I should also share then, I wasn't the only person in this massive organization who got the coaching bug. There were others who, we discovered each other, and we started to form a community of practice. People who had invested their own money in getting trained because, like me, they had seen the how powerful coaching could be. And so people with a real passion for coaching. And that was, as we started to come together, it created this sense of, okay, we're in this together. We can do something to change the culture here from more of a paternal command and control culture to much more coach-like. So I'd like to think that I had quite a big influence in that sense, being one of the leaders of that community of practice. And what I say to coaches who might feel a bit alone in an internal role is to look around you, because there will be other people who have made that same decision to get trained as a coach, and you can support each other. Yes, there are some organizations who have official coaching pools, and so you get that support. It is funded by the organization, and hopefully they also fund supervision and mentor coaching and CPD. But if you're in an organization that hasn't yet had that realization that coaching could be a good thing for the organization, you can still join up with like-minded people and start on that journey towards culture change. It was really frustrating. It was, you know, for me, it felt like 10 years of pushing water uphill. But I believed in it so much that I kept pushing the water uphill until just after I left the organization, an officially funded coaching practice was created within the organization. So all that pushing water uphill actually got to the top of the hill at that point. So what I'm essentially saying there is, if you are an internal coach and you have this passion for coaching, but you're looking around you and you're thinking the culture just doesn't want this, isn't ready for it. Well, they might not be ready for it yet, but you are an ambassador for coaching. And slowly, with everything that you do, you are making a difference. So believe that you are making a difference, even if you are, let's say, just coaching 2 people. You are making a difference to those 2 people and to the people on their teams, you know, vicariously, because those people there will be a ripple effect. You are making a difference as an internal coach.
Yeah. And that feels analogous to several other aspects of coaching, that we show up and we work with the person and we facilitate the process, and something around staying centered in the belief in the practice, even though what we see before us in the individual might not immediately look like progress or feel like them getting closer to what they want.
Yeah.
And yet my judgment is, again, speaking to all coaches, you are making a difference.
Yes. And as Teresa Amabile and Steve Kramer would say in their book, The Progress Principle, any progress is good progress, because progress begets more progress. If a person that we're working with feels like they have shifted the dial even just 1 notch, as long as they recognize, as long as we can enable them to recognize that shift, then that will give them, whether it's courage or momentum or motivation, to make the next little shift and the next little shift. We're not, and you know, there is something in this coaching industry where sometimes we promise magic. We might not say it quite like that, but we promise and we hope for massive change. It's not like that. It's really not. Sometimes it's the glimmers of hope. And I'd like to credit some supervision I had recently around this, because this is something that's really hit home for me through this supervision session. That even in organizational systems that feel like they are making it incredibly hard for the individual to make changes, the work that we can do together with them is about finding the glimmers of hope, not making massive changes. Just, yeah, I can't say that enough. Glimmers of hope are just so important, and because that is about progress begetting progress.
Lovely. And so it is January 2015.
Yes.
What's happening?
Well, That's when I set up my business. I had left the corporate back in August of 2014. I was still I was still wedded to the idea at that point of being a head of coaching in an organization. But those jobs don't get advertised. They get created by somebody internal, and of course filled by that internal person who has created that role. So I came to the realization over those 3 months between August and January that the roles that I was applying for would have taken me back about 10 years to doing leadership development that didn't feel, for me, at the cutting edge. It wasn't innovative enough. I'd been in a very innovative organization where, that was, we weren't exactly, it wasn't part of the performance measurement process, but it was totally in the culture. So, I've got that running through me like a stick of rock: innovation, cutting edge, doing things differently, thinking differently. And so I came to the conclusion, if I wanted to be innovative and cutting edge and doing things, thinking differently, then I needed to be my own boss, and my own boss would allow me to do those things. It definitely took courage, because I am quite risk averse. I thought I really wanted a salary coming in, but once I'd made that decision, it felt like absolutely the right decision. I had redundancy money behind me, so it made for a bit of a cushion. It meant that I could pay off my mortgage, so I didn't have to worry about a mortgage. I have a husband who has a good salary, so I didn't have to worry about, I wasn't the sole breadwinner. I didn't have to worry about what I was bringing in. So I say all of that simply to say that I had, I could kind of rest easy about the finance side of things. Now, it didn't make me rest easy, because I have always striven. I was striving all the time, striving to bring in the equivalent of what I was bringing in previously, but that didn't happen for well, I'd say at the 4-year mark, I felt like I was kind of bringing in a minimum salary, let's say. But then it was probably at where are we now? We're at nearly 9 years now. So probably it was at the 6-year mark that I felt like I was bringing in the equivalent of what I earned in the corporate world. Okay. Now, when you talk about the equivalent, it's not just about the salary, it's also about the pension, it's about the healthcare provision, it's about the holiday entitlement, the sick leave. But you don't get a sick leave and holiday entitlement when you work for yourself. You don't earn anything when you're sick. So when I say it took to year 6 to feel like I was earning the equivalent of that, I mean, that's what I mean, is complete coverage of what I was getting previously.
Yeah, and I want to capture the piece around also that from client 1 in January 2001 to setting up in January 2015, there is this body of 14 years of practicing coaching
Yes.
at PCC. To some extent, I hear you had behaved intrapreneurially at the organization and had essentially been building a coaching function through lots of the activity you were doing off the side of your desk.
Yeah.
And so I judge those aspects also supported you in hitting the ground running when you set out your stall.
Yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, they are part of the picture for sure. So I had confidence in myself as a coach, absolutely. And yes, I had this entrepreneurial spirit. I will take that. Thank you for that compliment. It feels good to hear.
It was meant as one.
Thank you. But it's not enough if you don't know how to run a business, which I didn't know how to run a business. I had no grounding in that. I mean, okay, I had managed budgets inside the organization, but that wasn't my money. I hadn't created that money. So yes, I should attribute it. There were a lot of transferable skills from that corporate world into the external place of work, but I was learning how to market. I say that, but again, I was a blogger inside the organization, so I had already found my voice by blogging I think I had probably blogged for about 5 or 6 or 7 years inside the organization. So if you class that as a marketing tool, I was already happy with my written voice and that I had something to say that was worth listening to. So yes, I probably should put more credit on what I learned internally to be able to transfer externally, because so many people starting a business today say, oh, I can't do LinkedIn, I can't, oh, it just feels so dirty. Oh, well, I didn't have any of that because I'd got over that internally. So I mean, I can understand it, I can understand where it's coming from, but it just didn't apply to me on day one because I already had that background.
Yeah. And just to catch a couple of things. So for those listening that haven't stumbled upon Clare's blog, we'll put a link in the show notes so you can check it out. And indeed, I've noticed more recently you've had a number of guest bloggers on writing material. And to your point about LinkedIn, for those interested in following you on LinkedIn, are you now Clare Norman MCC?
Yes, I am, exactly.
Okay.
So we can include a link into that, and anybody who is listening, please do connect with me on LinkedIn, because I post something every single day and it's generally written for coaches. So there should be some glimmers of useful stuff in that, hopefully more than glimmers. But please, when you link in with me, please tell me that this is where you heard me, because I like to have the context of how we have met, in inverted commas.
Lovely. So do be clear that you heard Clare on the coach's journey. And so I want to spend a little time on these different bits of the business. So what I hear, and indeed was slightly guiding the conversation towards, is let's talk in business terms. The product was solid. Like, you had confidence as a coach, and the work in the room, in session, and in engagement is solid. And so you're stepping into being the head of a limited company, and you've got beginning bit of having managed budgets, so there's the money piece. I want to come back to money, but you've stumbled upon marketing, or rather brought that in, and so there's the consistent writing voice. Like, what else did that mean for you in terms of getting your name out there as an independent coach available for work?
Well, what I soon discovered was that it isn't what you know, it's who you know. Of course, that's an obvious thing to say. And it is also about, who do you know who knows you and loves you and has experienced you in the past? It's not about trying to find new, completely new people. That's the hardest way to get business. The way to get business is through referrals from people who know you and love you. Now, at the beginning of setting up your own business, you don't yet have, I didn't yet have external clients who could refer me to more external clients, etc. So I was quite reliant on my internal network and reconnecting with people that had known me and loved me over the course of my 17 years in the organization. So it took me a little while for the penny to drop on this, but I did, rebuilding my LinkedIn network was around reconnecting with those people who had seen me in action in some shape or form. It wasn't necessarily in coaching, but it was trying to get them to be my advocates, to be my champions, to be the people who might refer to me. Because people said lovely things about me when I left the organization. And so I needed to make the most of that goodwill. So I think in retrospect, what I learned was that while I was internal, I had not been building enough of an external network. I was really quite insular, and my network was very internal. It was also very global, so it wasn't UK based by the time I left, albeit I did have some UK colleagues who had known me from years before in the organization. But also the other mistake I made was because so many people were saying 9 years ago that coaching had to be face-to-face. This is the buyers of coaching said it had to be face-to-face. Somehow I got duped into or confused into thinking, well, I need to find local clients then. I'd been working in a global organization all these years. Why did I need to have local clients when I'd already been, and for years, been doing all this work on the phone? So another, lesson learned in retrospect. Why was I only trying to sell locally and not trying to sell to, or not sell, but asking my global contacts to refer people to me? So so much learning as I look back and think, why did the penny not drop sooner around that?
And what's your sense in this moment as to why it took a while for the penny to drop?
I don't know, something about The people I was surrounded by were all, talking about face-to-face coaching. And I didn't listen to my own inner knowing wisdom of, well, I've done it this other way for so long. Why am I thinking that I have to do it the same way as everybody else? So there was something about a lack of confidence in my own knowing about the marketing piece and how to get business. And so, whatever was in this fishbowl that I was in was what I was listening to, rather than listening to what was going on in here and in here.
And did you have a focus in terms of the type of coaching that you were offering in those early years of the business?
Yeah, so quite early on, I figured out that my focus was leadership and transitions coaching. The transitions coaching, because I'd just been through that massive transition myself of a redundancy. And so knowing what it really felt like to go through that whole grief curve. And I was about to say back out the other side. I still hold some grief about that. So I'm not out the other side at all. But the journey of that. So I felt like I had lived experience of transition, that at least that kind of transition. And also a lot of the coaching I had done internally was focused either on transitions or on helping people to step up as a leader. I mean, after all, I was in that leadership development space, so it felt natural for that to be how I badged myself. Now, that's not to say that that's necessarily what came to me, because people wanted to cover all sorts of stuff. But I felt like it did help people to kind of know. I don't want to call it a niche, but I certainly found it easier to talk about what I do by knowing specifically that I was looking for work around transitions and leadership. So it helped with the positioning of what I do, even though I do get other things coming into coaching.
And I've read that you set up a limited company from the get-go to be available to work with corporate buyers. And I wonder, in those early years, was the focus wholly with corporate buyers, or to what extent were you working directly with independent individuals that came to you off their own back?
I didn't have much independent coaching. It was mostly corporately funded. I had some work through an associateship that took me into the NHS, fascinating culture, and took me into charities as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed that, actually, the difference in values that were showing up in the coaching in those other organizational cultures. That was one thing that I think enhanced my coaching, because their values were different from the values that I'd grown up in, if you like, or that I had been steeped in. And so that was really useful to me to help me step out of a place of knowing and into a place of not knowing. I think that's certainly been part of my growth journey, is working with people who were not in industries like mine, and therefore I knew nothing about what they did, how they operated, what they valued. So it was, that was good for me as a coach, definitely, to come out of that sphere and into a different set of spheres.
Yeah. And to what extent did that change? I've got the advice monster in my head. So how did it affect your feeding of the advice monster, or otherwise, as regards working in areas where you didn't know the context and the industry?
Well, yeah. your insight is useful there, because it really did stop me from, because I couldn't give them advice because I didn't work there. I never had worked there. So where, I mean, I don't know at what point I shifted out of a little bit of, being tainted with mentoring and advice giving. I don't know exactly when that happened in my coaching journey, but definitely that would have been a crucial, a pivotal moment, shall we say, for having to step back and be more curious on their behalf. So enabling them to join the dots for themselves rather than me joining the dots for them.
And we talked about money a little bit, and that feels important. The awareness of, albeit you hit the ground running in January 2015, it was a 4-year journey to reach a minimum salary and a 6-year journey to get to the equivalent of what you were earning in the corporate world. And I wonder, looking back on that journey, what have been the key milestones in building towards that level of income? And I say that with some awareness of you likely being in the top 0.0, not sure how many zeros, 1% of coaches, certainly in the UK, to be making a corporate level salary from coaching. Recognizing that sits atop a gigantic mountain of experience, but in this period of being an independent business owner, what were the big building blocks that got you toward that?
Yeah. Well, before I answer that question, I am going to say I don't take much of a salary out of my business. I actually take it in pension. So because it's more tax efficient to take the money out of my business in pension. So that's just an aside, that's how I choose. I take a certain amount of salary, but most of it goes into my pension. But back to the milestone question. One piece was around having a portfolio of offerings. So not only coaching, but you'll know that I'm a mentor, coach, and a supervisor as well. So these 3 buckets are what enables me to earn money. I'm not sure that I could do it on coaching alone, honestly. So, but I do remember, I remember this really distinctly from a coach stroke mentor that I had as I was leaving the corporate world and coming into my own. In fact, it might have been before that. Anyway, doesn't matter when he said it. It feels very true to me that making a living from coaching alone is likely to be very difficult, because especially if you are selling one-to-one rather than or business to customer rather than business to business. If you're selling business to customer, that is a lot of business development. I mean, it's a huge amount of business development. Whereas selling business to business, selling into a corporate organization, might give you more coaching from that organization. It doesn't always follow, honestly. You know, I've done some business development with another business and got one piece, you know, one client from that, one thinker from that. So it doesn't always follow. But yeah, what he was trying to tell me was the operating model of selling coaching, just the business model just doesn't work financially. And I mean, I've never tried to disprove that, because I never have really tried to build a whole business based on just coaching. But as I say, I've got these other strings to my bow around mentor coaching and supervision. So I'd probably say, I mean, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but let's say I get a third of my income from each of those three strands. So, you know, there's something about being realistic about can a person really make a living just from coaching? I'm not sure. I imagine if we looked at their portfolio, they'd be doing other things like coach training or leader as coach training, or some consultancy in there maybe, or something else. I suspect that most people have got a portfolio, not just coaching.
Yeah. I'm interested in the division into the three areas, and that you are essentially speaking to two different audiences. So there is an attenuation of your business development practices, I imagine, and I feel compelled to offer a soft challenge to the sense that one couldn't make a corporate salary from, I accept it is challenging to make a corporate salary solely from coaching. And I wonder, of course, we can't ever really know, that had you chosen to do that and used all your business development resources to wholly speak to a thinker-based audience, or the buyer that leads to the thinker, as opposed to working through coach mentoring and supervision with coaches, whether that might have been as successful.
But what I may or may not be right on this, but my experience is that I haven't been able to figure out where buyers of coaching really hang out to be able to sell to them, because they are so busy in their day job that they don't necessarily go to networking events apart from closed networking events of their peers. I mean, I'm sure they do go to conferences, but I think there's also something about me being an introvert, and
Right.
there's
Yeah.
something of that wrapped up in there. But I know exactly where coaches hang out. I
Yeah.
can get
Yeah.
to coaches really easily.
Yeah.
I feel like I've figured that out.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
do hang out on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
so they are seeing my posts on LinkedIn. They do hang out on podcasts and
Yeah.
listen to podcasts.
Yeah. Yeah.
They do hang out in coaching circles, so I can go and present at coaching circles. So my business development for those two things is really clear to me,
Yeah.
what to do there and how to get, hook them into what I offer.
Yeah.
It's still much more murky for me around selling coaching.
Yeah.
I
And
haven't
what
figured it out.
Yeah, what I hear, and so the word murky for me sparks the metaphor of for your coach's referral pool, the waters are clearer and the banks have more integrity. And
Yes.
whereas it's more diffuse and murky and perhaps marshy at the edges because the buyers of straight coaching are hanging out in far broader waters.
Mm.
I, again, referring back to my extensive research, I
You've
wonder
been stalking me.
yes, I've been blog and podcast appearance stalking you, and I've reread mentor coaching, and I've been listening to. I love that you did your own recording of the Transformational Coach, and I want to come to. There's so much that I still want to come to. Let me ask a question, like anyone doing an interview might. What's your gut reaction to the Prosperous Coach?
The book, The Prosperous Coach, the
Yeah,
principles, the mindset, The Prosperous.
yeah,
So it's a little while since I read the book. Um, I I seem to recall that there were some bits in it that I thought, oh, that's useful, and then there were other bits that I was like, oh, I couldn't do that.
yeah. And does that speak to your introverted nature, or is it something more broad?
I think it's probably introverted. It's probably also something about the amount of work that might be necessary. So you spoke to my business development time is kind of divided. And so yeah, I'm not spending all my business development on just one focus and one audience. And so to put so much focus over on the bringing more direct coaching business in, through some of the stuff that the Prosperous Coach was talking about, felt, oh, that's quite big. That would take me away from the work I do over here. And actually, I really quite like the work I do over here. So I think that was part of it. But as I say, it's a while since I read it.
And I think at its core, it speaks to some of the things that I hear you're saying as relates to the capacity to more easily connect with coaches than and that being part of this Prosperous Coach method of connect, create.
So I've probably taken some of that and applied it to my business development for coaches, as opposed to applying it on the other side of things.
One last thing, which may lead us somewhere else, but on the business development and the money piece, again, acknowledging that there's so many other things I'm really eager we get to cover. I notice that I have a wondering about your sense of at what point during the business development, did your referral pool get to, let's say for the sake of keeping it easier, get to a point within your pure coaching business that it involved less outreach and networking?
Yeah, I'd say that's happened in the last 2 to 3 years. So I don't, I might be doing myself a disservice here, but I don't feel like I do very much business development on the coaching side these days, because I do feel like it comes to me from referrals. I definitely get referrals coach to coach coming to me. And yet I still do quite a lot of other stuff to entice more coaches. So yeah, probably in the last 2 to 3 years. So that would have been 6 or 7 years in. Yeah, it takes a lot. It takes a long time. Well, it took me a long time. Maybe I was doing something wrong, but I think we do need to recognize the research that 70% of coaching comes through referral. It comes from word of mouth. So therefore, it doesn't make sense doing cold calling, for example, because you know you're using perhaps 80% of your time to get 1% return. But trying to figure out your referral processes feels more worthwhile in terms of the return on investment that you're going to get. How will you ask for referrals? How do you get over that, any stickiness that you've got around asking for referrals? Because again, I know some coaches do have a bit of a, oh, I can't ask. Surely if they wanted to refer somebody, they would just do it. Well, they're busy people. They don't remember to do it unless they are specifically asked. So there's something about how do we look at our processes for integrating that referral piece in.
And you've sent me off down another the trail with processes.
Yes.
And again, from an awareness of the things that you've written and spoken about, I wonder what other processes for you as a business owner feel useful to share with an audience that is largely peopled by other small business owners.
So underpinning my processes is my PA, who has set up a lot of these processes for me. You know, we figured out together what it was that I needed, and she's actually done the building of them using technologies, tools, stuff. So I couldn't have done it without her. And what it has meant is that it has freed me up to do more of the work, because my processes are taking care of the administrative side of stuff. So I use a tool called Dubsado. It wasn't specifically created for coaches, but it was created for small businesses and entrepreneurs to help you to create a workflow which gets triggered either by on a certain date or after a certain thing has happened. It's automated, so I don't have to remember to send joining instructions. They get, you know, once somebody has been added into Dubsado as a client, it triggers the partnership agreement between them and me. They get to sign it. Once they've signed it, it comes back to me to sign, and then that triggers joining instructions, etc., etc., etc. So it's triggering stuff all the way through. So that's the one I use. I think I might, if I had my time again, I might actually choose one that's been created specifically for coaches, because I suspect we've had to find a few workarounds that this technology hasn't, because it wasn't created for coaches and our business. So there are plenty of those around. I saw a demo of Delenta the other day, for example. There's coaching.com. I tell you what, coaching.com, I spoke to them when I was still in my corporate role, and they had a different name back then. And I wish I'd invested in it there right back then, because I probably would have been on their legacy price. But for whatever reason, I decided not to. But I wish I had, because that looks like a really strong process these days, but it costs a lot more than it did back then. But I think we need to recognize those costs as part of our business. We've got to, it's got to be part of how we figure out our pricing strategy. We need to cover the costs of those kinds of things that make the experience better for the people that we're working with and for us. So, that's something I've written about in the past. Make sure you itemize every single cost item so that you can include that in your pricing. Because if you're only pricing for your time, you will be running at a loss. I mean, you're probably already undervaluing yourself anyway, but you'll even more be running at a loss because you've got insurance to cover, you've got membership of the Information Commissioner's Office that you need to cover, you've got any tools that you use. If you use Zoom, you'll be paying for a Zoom license, or Teams. All these little things, they add up, and they need to be part of your pricing strategy.
And my experience of being at the client end of your process is it works elegantly. So we first properly connected when I came on your mentor coach training. We were talking about that before we started the call today. So I can say that it's a pleasant and comprehensive, or coherence, probably a better word, experience of receiving what comes at one from the triggers that Dubsado is sending out. I want to take a left turn and talk a bit about your books, and also what I've heard you say more and more recently around suggesting coaches need to unlearn rather than learn. So I pulled out my well-thumbed copy of Mentor Coaching. I can't do the same with your most recent book because I've got it on audiobook and I listen to it when I'm out running. There it is. You've got that one. Fantastic. So let's start as a way in with coaches need to unlearn rather than learn.
So what I have noticed as I am mentor coaching, i.e. watching people coaching and giving them feedback on their coaching, is that there can be some resistance to changing the way that they coach because they're holding on to an old belief, or a mindset, as I would call it. And that mindset has come from introjections from their parents or their teachers or their workplace or even their coach training. So these things that we learned in previous lives that have just become a part of us. and they have therefore become a part of us as coaches without us really querying, is that still a useful mindset to hold on to in the coaching arena? Or is it stopping me from being the best coach that I can be for the people that I work with? And so in the Transformational Coach, I have identified 83 of these mindsets that we potentially could decide to unlearn. And we need to unlearn them in order to replace them with a different, more useful mindset for the coaching arena. It doesn't mean that we will change that mindset in other parts of our life. So, for example, our parents in many families taught us that it's rude to interrupt, which in normal conversation, it is rude to interrupt. You know, we wouldn't do that. So it's still useful in normal conversation. But in coaching, there is a time and a place for interruption. We should never interrupt their new thinking. When they're getting to new thinking, do not interrupt. But when they're going over old ground, storytelling, giving us lots of context, stuff they already know, that's a time to interrupt and check in with them, whether it's useful to them to say this stuff out loud. So that's an example of something we might need to unlearn to enable us to be more masterful as a coach, to enable us to interrupt where, you know, we might otherwise have our mum's voice in our head saying, don't do that, it's rude, you mustn't interrupt, you must listen and listen and listen and listen, even if that means that half an hour of the session is taken up with them updating us on the story. Because that's what's happening. They're updating us. They're not updating themselves because they know it already, usually.
Yeah. I must confess, when I began your book, I thought, 83?
Yeah,
I mean, really? There's some filler in there. There's got to be. And then I like it had my skepticism coupled with a contrasting experience of your mentor coaching book of going, no, actually that is tightly written. That is desiccated to not have waffle and filler. So okay, 83. And I haven't finished your book yet. I am in the mid-60s and I haven't yet got to one where I've gone, that's nonsense. There's been absolutely no filler so far.
And I really love it that you described the first one as desiccated, because I wrote that book in 5 weeks. It just came out of me. I mean, okay, that was the first draft and it needed a bit of editing, but it was just a distillation of everything I knew about mentor coaching, but without any waffle. And also the other reason I like the word desiccated is because I've always said that I hate books that give you the key point and then they waffle on for another 120 pages when you've already got the key point. So I'm hoping that you'll get to 83 and also feel like they have all been worthwhile.
Yeah. And that's, I suppose, the lovely thing of you is there's little danger of you writing a book that could have been a blog post, because you probably would have written it as a blog post. So there isn't this kernel of an idea that's then fluffed out to create something bigger, but not necessarily any more substantial.
Yeah.
How does mentor coaching support the unlearning?
Because if we are being a really good mentor coach, we're not only looking at the competencies, but we're also looking at the mindsets behind the competencies that are necessary to bring those competencies to life. So we could just give feedback on what we see going on in front of us. But if we want to help the coach to really sustain change in the way they coach, we can also ask questions about, and what is it that is stopping you from putting that competency into place? And I mean, it might not be as obvious as that, but let's take one example, which I think I've written about in the Transformational Coach. And this is where a coach had brought a recording to mentor coaching with me, and we noticed that she was showing up in quite a maternal kind of way as the coach. Little bit of rescuing going on there, as a mum might do with their child. And I said, so, what's that about? What's going on for you there? And she realized that in the moments running up to her sitting down at her coaching desk and chair, she had been playing with her children. And there was no conscious shift out of that real mother role into the coaching role that needs to be adult to adult. And she recognized that actually what she needed to do at the threshold of her coaching room was to shed her mum cape, if you like, and put on a coach's cape. And so that's what I mean by, there's some, it's not really unlearning, but it's shedding your being a mum for a little while and embracing a different mindset that is necessary and required for coaching. And so if we'd have only looked at the competency and how to change her behavior without her realizing that, oh, it's because I was playing with my kids just before, then she would carry on in that same way over and over and over again, and find it incredibly difficult to sustain a change in behavior in the coaching room, because she wouldn't have figured out that that's what was stopping her.
And so the shift, what I hear in it is that the shift is at depth as opposed to a surface change. So going
exactly
a couple of layers down beneath,
yes,
supports a more sustained change for the better.
Yeah. And I think, Neil, that I might have realized that after you came on the mentor coach training, because I know that my mentor coach training has shifted somewhat to incorporate much more of that. Look out for the mindsets. Don't just work at the skill set level, because what we're doing if we only look at skill sets is we're getting people ready to submit a recording to the ICF, but then they'll just revert back to type when they go, when they've got their credential. And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for sustained change, just as we are with the people we work with in coaching. It's about sustainable change. It's not just about a momentary shift.
And if we look at the significant journey you've gone on over the last 22 years to reach master certified coach level with the International Coaching Federation, what has been the most significant unlearning for you as part of that journey?
Well, oh God, there's so much. Really, I mean, when I started my mentor coaching for the MCC, I was in tears, because I was like, I'm so far away from this. I'm never going to be able to do this. But so I get what it's like to be in mental coaching.
But what
Um,
far away in what respect? What was the distance comprised of?
well, it was partly around the who. So I needed to move away from focusing on what they were bringing to work on to who they were becoming. And I know that just sounds so jargony, but the transformation happens at a very personal level for people. I think we could have a whole podcast on that, so I won't say any more about that. But it was also partly about, and I've just kind of come up with this expression, sticking to them like Velcro, or sticking to their agenda like Velcro. And what I mean by that is whatever is the very last thing that the thinker has said, that's where their new thinking has taken them to. So rather than me going back to something they said 3 or 4 or 5 sentences ago, is what is the last thing that's just come up, and asking a question or making an observation about that, because that's where they've just got to. And so it's the mindset shift about, it's like just not holding on to anything that was back here, and being right there with them in that very moment. And I just came across a Japanese expression that I love, that seems to describe this. It's I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, I may not be. Ishi-e Ishigo, and it means this moment in time will never ever happen ever again. And so it's here that we need to be completely present to. It's this thing that they have just said, or just expressed in their facial expression, or in that big sigh. Stick with that moment in time. So that's been a big learning for me, not to feel like I have to kind of hold on to something that happened a while back, because they've already become a different person in those 5 or 6 seconds.
And I've heard it described in another way, in another place, as the enormity of now.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place to have the opportunity to spend time in our professional lives, or speaking from the first person, to try and access that level of presence and emergence that, to use one of your earlier words that really jumped out at me, is so vital.
Yes.
And perhaps speaking a little more than is helpful to my belief system, is essentially all we ever have.
Yeah, exactly. And if we have any sense that this person in front of us is the same as, or is bringing the same presenting issue, well, they might be bringing the same presenting issue as the person we coached last week, but the coaching session itself will be totally different, because they are totally different from that person. What they think and feel and believe and value is totally different. And so that's why we need to be right here in the here and now, rather than thinking about, oh, what did I do with that person last week? And what's the solution they came up with? Because it's not going to be the same for this person who is totally unique. And that, I think that's the massive, massive shift I've made over those 22 years, from what I described as performance coaching at the beginning of my journey, where I was driving them to a solution and I had in my mind what the solution was. And, you know, there was a right answer, to now there is no one right answer. And, you know, that is the most fulfilling coaching, when you can enable another to find the best fit answer for them at that moment in time. It might not be the best answer for them, and they may still experiment and, you know, figure out, oh, actually I need to tweak it a little bit. But right here, right now, our job is to enable them to discover the essence of who they wish to be.
Beautiful.
Oh, it's quite profound, if I say so myself.
I think you should. And so, being mindful of time as we move into the last phase of our conversation, I wonder what haven't we covered that it feels important to address or attend to from your perspective?
Well, perhaps something connected to process that we were talking about before. So also it's connected to systems. So it kind of brings together a few strands of what we've been talking about. So my learning has, and my thinking has taken me to a space of having written a transformational coach, and what it is that the coach could unlearn in order to be a better coach. How do we want the thinker to show up to coaching? And how can we enable them to show up to coaching in a way that can give them the most value from coaching? So that's where my head is going at the moment. What is it that we need to integrate into the whole coaching experience to enable them to get the most out of coaching? And it's not just about us, the coach. It is also about, you know, if we're working in the corporate world, what are the responsibilities of the coaching custodian, for example, to set this program of coaching up for success, so that we don't try to do everything in a compatibility call, what might historically have been called a chemistry call. Because at the moment, chemistry calls are just trying to be all things to all people. It's a sales call, it is a fit call, it's an explaining what coaching is and what it isn't, it's a what are their goals for it. I mean, it's trying to cover so much in a half an hour or 45-minute session, and it's too watered down at the moment. And so I'm thinking about developing my thinking about what needs to happen up front to enable that compatibility call to focus purely on compatibility and nothing else. And then for every step in the process, in the what I would call the coaching experience, to be looking through the lens of coachability, if you want to use that word. I know some people don't like that word, but I'm thinking there's a compatibility 2.0. It's not what we might have thought of coachability some years back, but I think we are maturing in our thinking about what coachability is, what coaching readiness is. This idea of creating value. And at the moment, the coach takes a lot on their shoulders around creating value for the thinker, when actually how is the thinker showing up in order to get the most value from this? And how can we enable them to show up in a way that cultivates that? So that's where my latest thinking is going, which will culminate in a book that comes out in October. As we record this, the title is not yet decided. It is definitely morphing as I write, as often happens with writing processes, when we learn more about what we really think when we start writing it down. But watch this space for the next book in October.
Lovely. And in that, I hear the profound importance of it as regards us truly entering into a partnership with someone.
Yeah.
And I'm mindful, albeit considerably earlier in a coaching journey in comparison to someone like you, that I can already lose touch with where a thinker, to use your language, might be at when they are approaching the potential of a coaching relationship, and become unconnected to seeing things from beginners' eyes, who may not have a real understanding of what coaching is in comparison to, say, mentoring or a chat with a friend and so forth. And if I'm already losing touch with that a few years in, how can we as a body of professionals, many of whom are considerably further away from a naive and innocent understanding of what all the many things that are possible with coaching and just what an extraordinary practice it can be, how can we support these thinkers to make more informed and qualified choices as they approach that potential? It sounds powerful.
Yeah, that's exactly the purpose of it, to enable them to approach it with more knowing, more understanding, more understanding of what does it mean to be in partnership. That, they're not just turning up for us to wave a magic wand, which can be quite frustrating for us as coaches. And yes, we need to meet them wherever they're at, and if that is how they show up, then we meet them there and we figure that out together. But if we could help them to really understand it before they commit to coaching, before they so that they can decide, yes, this is what I want to invest my time in, even if somebody else is footing the bill. This is still my time and it's my energy, the thinker's time and the thinker's energy. Do they really want this? Are they really coming into this with their eyes open about the hard work that is going to be required of them? Because it is hard work, thinking. So, yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for your work, for which I am grateful and have certainly benefited from, and for your writing and for your sharing of your gifts and your experience. We will link to the things I've mentioned in the show notes, and of course your website and the Transformational Coach book. Anywhere else you'd encourage listeners to check out if they want to learn more about you, your work?
Well, we've already said, I would love for people to link in with me, and just to let me know that this is where they discovered me. They might have come across me before, but this might be the trigger to connect with me so that they can learn more. And also to look out for webinars that I run on coaching circles, for example. I do make myself known. So there's usually plenty going on that people can come and listen to me more. Or, if you don't want to listen to me, read more. There's plenty of reading material out there, as you have alluded to, whether that's in the books or the blogs. People can sign up to receive my blog in their inbox if they wish to not miss anything. Yeah. And of course, they can come to any one of my mentor coaching programs or supervision programs or whatever. But that's all detailed on my website if they're interested in checking that out and then coming and talking to me.
Great. Once again, Claire, thank you sincerely for all that you do and for your time today.
And thank you for bringing out the best in me today. I have had plenty of little aha moments along the way and things that may well be showing up on LinkedIn at some point. So thank you.
Wonderful. Delighted to hear it. Thank you.